Hello, and welcome to Homegrown KC, a podcast dedicated to exploring Kansas City's fascinating history and sharing stories from its rich past. I'm your host, Laura. Joining me today is Dr. Fred Grogan, said it correctly,
Got it.
the chair of the board for the Lee Summit Historical Society. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
Can you start by telling us about yourself? How did you get to be
Good
here?
Bob. I have lived in Lee Summit since 1985. I moved here from Pennsylvania, my home state, and I moved here in order to become Dean of Instruction at Penn Valley Community College in the Metropolitan Community College system. After 4 years there, we actually found and bought a house in Lee Summit, and after 4 years commuting to Penn Valley, and spending most of my time there, I then moved out as a dean at Longview Community College, also part of Metropolitan Community College. So we belonged to the Historical Society for quite a number of years, but I didn't become active in it until after I retired. I was asked to join the board in 2015. And I had retired in 2013. And so have served on the board since that time and have been chair for 8 years now.
What were you teaching?
Well, my academic background is in political science. And I moved into administration at Lycoming College, private college in Williamsport, Pennsylvania.
Actually, I know where that is. I applied there when
You
I
did?
was...
Did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, very good, very good. Yeah, it was a nice college. It was a nice experience. And I became involved in the community there as well. I was chairman of the planning commission in Williamsport. But I had been at a community college previous to that, previous to going to Mizzou for my doctorate in political science. And the mission of the community college really resonated with me, both in terms of providing opportunities for students who many times didn't have a lot of opportunities, as well as being really actively involved in the community. And so when my wife's father died, she wanted to be closer to her mother, who lived back here in Missouri, and that's when we moved to Kansas City. And initially, we lived in Lee Summit, but I worked in Kansas City and then transferred to Longview. And I was active both in the college and in the community here in Lee Summit as well during that time.
What is it about history that draws you in?
You know, I've always been interested in history. When I planned to go to college, I planned to go in either history. I really didn't know about political science, but I was kind of drawn to the political aspects of history. I was fascinated with presidents and fascinated with political aspects over time. And so when I went to college, I majored in political science. Actually, my college called it government at the time, but it's basically political science. But that includes a lot of history. You have to have the historical context in order to do that. And I'd grown up around a lot of history in Pennsylvania. We seem to have historical markers, for example, everywhere. And my wife would get irritated with me because when we would drive anywhere, I would keep stopping at all the historical markers to read all of them. So I've just been drawn to them. And then when we moved to Lee Summit, we lived in a home that was built in 1902. So there was a lot of history in that house and in the neighborhood that we lived in. And so even though I wasn't from this area, I became fascinated with the community's history as well.
So as chair of the board, what is your role?
Well, my role is, our board is what I would call a working board. So we would probably not be evaluated very favorably in terms of what classically a board is supposed to do. A board classically is supposed to set the policy and let the staff carry that policy out, and the board should not get involved in day-to-day activities. But however, we have no staff. So it was determined pretty quickly that if we were going to get anything done, then the board had to be actively involved in either doing it and or recruiting others who could do that. So we do have a wonderful group of volunteers, probably 18, 20 volunteers who do all kinds of different activities for us. And we couldn't operate without them. There's no question about that. But the board especially takes responsibility for developing the plan for the museum. I joined the board when we first moved into this building, and so we initially just simply moved items in, and then we had to determine how those items were going to be organized, what was going to be the flow of the museum, for example. So we established a committee on exhibits that involved both board members and volunteers as well too. So and the volunteers did a lot of the work, and they were essential in that process. But the board also takes responsibility for the financial solvency of the organization as well. So a lot of our role tends to be in terms of reaching out to potential donors and grant makers. We have a board member who does a lot of the grant writing for us, and that person has experience in doing that, so it's a perfect fit. Our executive committee, we have a retired architect, a retired individual from American Century who supervised all the staff of American Century, and a consultant in technology and operations, and myself in higher ed, who composed that. We work really well together.
Sounds like your backgrounds are a really good mix.
Yeah, it is. It's a good mix. I think we also recognize each other's skills, and we recognize that ourselves don't necessarily have those skills. So it's better to listen to the other person. So yeah, we have a really good working operation, and we have a good mix of skills and perspectives. And we do have we don't always necessarily automatically agree on something, and that's healthy. That's really useful. But we work well together, and that's really important.
Good.
As well.
Yeah, listeners, we haven't encountered this yet in the other folks that I've spoken with, but it's actually really common to not have staff at a museum, especially a small local museum like this, and it's run by volunteers by the board.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, that being said, our goal that kind of drives us in our longer term planning is that we do need, we need at least a part-time, professionally trained director for the museum. We need that face in the community. We need that person who can at least focus somewhat on fundraising, because that's essential. We get no funds from the city or any other entity automatically. So we're responsible for all of our operations and for anything that we do in terms of enhancing our exhibits. So that is driving us. We're getting close to that point. That's good. The pandemic was difficult for us in terms of hampering attendance and hampering our potential fundraising activities, but we actually came through it very well, and have actually added to our net assets during that time. So
that's great.
Yeah, so we're hopeful that within a couple of years we can be at the place where we can move away from being totally volunteer.
You mentioned that There we go. Computer's still working. You mentioned that you moved to this building in 2015.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So can you tell us, this is a two-part question, about the history of the building and like when did the Historical Society start and where were you before this?
Sure. You want me to start with the Historical Society first and then
let's do that.
the building? Okay. The Historical Society actually started in 1974, so not that long ago, although that's almost 50 years now. And it was actually initiated by a relative of the founder of the community. The May Howard was a local historian or a local individual who was really interested in the history of the community. And she was married to the grandson of the founder of Lee Summit.
Well, hang on, let's pause here.
Sure.
If the founder of Lee Summit is Mr. Howard, why is it not Howard Summit?
Pardon?
Why is it not Howard Summit?
That's interesting. Well, it actually, he named the town initially after the maiden name of his wife. And it turned out that there was already another town of that name in Lee Summit that was registered with and had a post office. So they had to change the name of the town. And there is a controversy about the name of the town and whether it was actually Lee Summit, spelled L-E-A apostrophe S Summit, or L-E-E apostrophe S Summit, which is what our name is now, L-E-E apostrophe S. The May Howard actually always insisted that it was always named after seems to indicate that it was actually initially named after a Dr. Lee, who was the most well-respected individual in this town when the town was first formed. And his name was spelled L-E-A. And what apparently transpired is that when the railroad went through, they were using a railroad car as a depot at the time, and the railroad workers spelled the name of the town L-E-E apostrophe S instead of L-E-A, and that ended up becoming the name that was recorded of the town. I'm not sure if we ever know exactly what is the exact proof, but we've seen some of the records where in the local newspapers reference initially was given to it as L-E-A apostrophe S. And I guess in some ways that's become somewhat of a political football because was it really named by Southern sympathizers for General Lee, or was it named for the local esteemed doctor who was actually a Northern sympathizer at the time?
Getting away from our original question a little bit.
I know.
No, I'm taking us that way.
Okay.
Is there any talk in the community of maybe we should change our name, since you mentioned
No,
that?
not really, because the history of it now has been so long that it would, I guess it would be difficult, and that issue of that political issue is not as strong now.
Okay.
In fact, it wasn't that strong after the border war, when this area was cleared out initially, after order number 11. This area is called the burnt district, and people were forced to flee, and most of the farms and buildings around here were burnt, and there was nothing left to them. A lot of what was valuable before they burned it was carted away over to Kansas, and so this area then was not, and that was in the 1850s. So this area was not really much populated heavily populated until the 1870s. And in the 1870s, there were actually more people of northern heritage that moved into the area than of southern heritage. A lot of the people who were driven out never came back. They went to Texas, or they went to Kentucky and Tennessee, where a lot had come from initially. Yeah. Okay. So fascinating. It's interesting in that periodically that issue of LEE or LEA comes up. In fact, I think last year there was an article in the Kansas City Star about the name of Lee Summit, in which this was rehashed.
Well, it's a good example of some of the issues that historians
deal
with.
It is. Yeah, it's fascinating. So the nice thing about history is it's a process. A lot of times it's never really fully settled. So there's always more to research.
Very true.
Yeah, very much.
All right. So our original question. The original question was how did the historical start? How did it get started?
So it started in 1974 by May Howard, and initially was a fairly small group, although fairly quickly they opened a small museum in one end of the depot, which I think, but that was not done until the Lee Summit Chamber moved into the depot probably in the late 80s or 90s. I'm not sure of the exact date. And so there was a small space, and quite frankly, that space was not much larger than the room that we're sitting in. It was jammed full with a lot of materials, maybe another 50% on that building. And that has since been once we moved over here, then the chamber occupied that space.
Listeners, to give you an idea, the room that we're in now is, I would say, 10 by 10, like perfectly square.
I'd say maybe 12 by 12.
Okay. But small.
Small. That's right. So it was, I will say one thing, it was very rich with artifacts. Anyway.
That's a good description.
So, and snug. So in 1985, I'm sorry, not 85, 2015, we were able to move to this building because the city was able to renovate this building with a bond issue that was floated along with other improvements to the downtown area of Lee Summit. And so we rent this building from the city for $1 a year. And in return, we operate and pay all the operating expenses for the museum. And the city maintains the building itself.
So that was the other half of the original question is, what's the history of this building?
Right, history of this building. And the history of this building is that it was built by the WPA, the Works Project Administration, in 1939, which was part of Roosevelt's New Deal. A lot of public buildings were built across the country. A lot of parks were built by the WPA. And this was built as a post office and served as a post office until the 1960s. And then a new post office was built actually behind this building, on the street behind this building. And that served as the post office until maybe 10 years ago. And then the post office moved out of the downtown area at that time. And then after serving as a post office, it became City Hall. And when the new City Hall was built in Lee Summit down on Green Street, then this building initially was used by Rediscover Mental Health, which serves the metropolitan area.
Did I see
This
that their
was
building
one of
is
them.
also still nearby?
Pardon?
Did I see that their building is still nearby?
Rediscover?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Rediscover is they have a large building on 291, and then I think they also have another building in town as well too. And then they have other facilities in Kansas City and other locations. So
Okay.
it's pretty extensive network. Well, so the building became vacant when Rediscover moved out. It was then renovated by the city to be made available to the museum because for some time there had been some desire to have the chamber wanted the space in the depot, and the museum obviously needed more space. So that became the opportunity for us at that time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when it was renovated, how much do you know of the building is still original?
Actually, the whole building is original. It's back to its original footprint.
Okay.
When the city had it, there was an annex built to the back of the building, and in fact, our conference room was in that building. The room that we're sitting in, this had been originally built as the postmaster's office, and this was used as the mayor's office when it was City Hall. There is a mural above the entrance when you come into this room, and that mural was done by a WPA artist. The WPA employed quite a large number of artists who, of course, were out of work, like everybody else was out of work during the Depression, and they painted a lot of those kind of murals around. They really have become tourist attractions in and of themselves. There are people, in fact, who tour WPA built buildings, both to see the buildings and to see the murals that are built. I don't know if you've noticed, but the style of the mural is reminiscent of Thomas Hart Benton quite a bit.
Yeah, Sue pointed that out. It's really lovely.
Yeah, it is really nice. When we moved in, we had it restored. It was pretty grimy and dirty. And so, yeah, it's kind of back to more its original appearance. Yeah.
So, what history do you cover within the museum?
Well, we try to cover as well as we can a fairly comprehensive view of the development of the town, focusing on particular periods. We acknowledge probably our space, even though the space we have now is a lot more space than the museum had originally, it's still a fairly limited amount of space. So we try to cover those major periods, starting with the fact that this area was initially Osage Indian country, and then moving to the founding of the town and how that took place and the role that the border wars played in shaping the history of this area, and then moving on to the agricultural past of the community, giving some focus on the role that the nation's conflicts had on the community and how the community played a role in those conflicts as well. So we try to show both the impact of national and world events on the community, and then the community's own interaction and impact they have on those events as well, kind of as a two-way street that takes place. We have one area that depicts a WPA era, Depression era kitchen, which includes a lot of an old refrigerator, an old stove, various kitchen implements. I wondered aloud to our volunteers one day whether we really needed to keep that exhibit there. Were people really interested in it? And they informed me that, in fact, that was one of the most interesting areas, especially to younger people who came in because they had never seen things like that and didn't know what they were and were fascinated by the old implements. We also have some old telephones and old typewriter and things of that sort. So that points out to us that one of the gaps we currently have and want to try to do more with is to have more that is appealing to younger people and have things that they can touch, feel, try out. Maybe put some paper in that typewriter and let them peck away and see what it feels like to actually use an old typewriter. And then we have, of course, I mentioned one of the most notorious characters in Lee Summit's history was Cole Younger. In fact, there used to be the summer celebration in Lee Summit was referred to as Cole Younger Days. After a while, people had some concern about the message that put out about celebrating celebrating a criminal, and so it's now called Downtown Days instead. But we have a lot of items from him. We had an incident in 2020 when we had a robbery in the museum, and a number of his pistols that he owned were stolen. To our great surprise, they were all returned. So that was a really nice success story. And we do have an area, it's smaller than we would like, but we have an area that we dedicate to having rotating exhibits. So we try to have something relatively new in the museum at all times. So there's always something to bring people back for a second look and a second visit to the museum. Currently, we have an exhibit on Harry Truman and Lee Summit. We have an exhibit on students' reactions in 2001 to the attack on the World Trade Center, and teachers had students write their reactions to that. So we have those notebooks on exhibit.
I gotta be honest, my question there is how old are these students? Because
they were high school students
at the time?
Yeah, they were high school students at the time. Yeah, so
it's not like high school students today trying to write about their reaction.
It was taken at that time. So it's getting me, which makes it really interesting to see what the media.
Because then you get
the
reaction in that moment.
Right, at that time. Yeah, exactly. And then we have an exhibit on the schools that were brought into the R7, the Lee Summit R7 school district, which prior to that time had consisted of about 16 or 17 independent small schools as well. So we're doing we've had 8 different temporary exhibits this year. I think we had 8 or 9 last year as well too. So that helps keep things a bit fresh. We've also designed some of the regular exhibits so that we can freshen them up a bit each time. For example, in the Lee Summit at War exhibit, we focus on 2 individuals from Lee Summit who were in the war, in World War II. One who returned and opened a gas station, a successful business in this town, and then another one who did not return. And the intention is that as we get more items donated to us, then we will focus on different individuals, and so that allows us to kind of freshen that up over time. Yeah, but we're really kind of dependent upon people giving items to us that kind of allows us to tell a story that will be interesting to visitors.
Well, that's always the case, especially in a small local museum.
Yeah,
but exactly. It sounds like you have a lot of descendants of prominent members who come and visit you.
We do, yeah, we do. For example, we have a family who is related to the Younger family. And the Younger family, for people who only think of the Youngers as outlaws, may not know that the Younger family was actually a very prominent local family. They had land holdings in Lee Summit between, they owned the land where the, what used to be the Truman campus of the Truman Medical Center in just north of here. And then they had a farm near Raintree Lake. And then they had extensive properties in Harrisonville. Their main home was Harrisonville at the time. And Cole and James and his other brothers were actually from Harrisonville, and their father was a merchant in Harrisonville. He was killed on his way back from a buying trip to Kansas City. And it was rumored that he was killed, although it's never been verified, but it was rumored that he was killed by Union troops from Kansas. And so just as the James brothers avenged their father being almost killed by Union soldiers, so initially the younger sons became outlaws to avenge their father's death. And so it's a really interesting, multi-layered story. That whole period is just totally fascinating.
It is. No, I agree. I knew of them, as the outlaws. I didn't know that they had so much property. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they were a very, very prominent family. They're the best movie that I've seen that depicts that era, the border war era, that involved Missouri and Kansas is Ang Lee's Ride with the Devil. It really depicts well how that conflict at that time divided families, that it was kind of hard to know who were the good guys and who were the bad guys because they tended to be both. Each side had the bad side to it and each side had the good side to it. So it was a complicated period of time. Yeah. Do you have a favorite item in your collection?
Oh gosh, that's interesting. I do. It's a odd favorite item, but it kind of, it's like artifacts, I think, are useful to museums if they tell a story. And it's a favorite item because it tells a story. We have a simple black pot. So what's interesting about a small black iron pot? Well, the fascinating part of it is that iron pot was the only item that remained when a family whose home was burnt following order number 11 returned to their farm. Their farm was in the area where Longview Farm now sits. And when they came back, the only item remaining on their farm was this black pot. So it's kind of symbolic of what people had to deal with at that time. There's a second item that's fascinating because it is for jazz lovers, any people out there who like jazz. Pat Metheny is from Lee Summit, and Pat Metheny is a well-known jazz artist. He has 20 Grammys. In fact,
that's what Beverly was saying. I was like, wow.
Yeah. Until a few years ago, he had the most Grammys of any recording artist. And we have his first Grammy is here in an exhibit we have about his family. His family owned a car dealership here in Lee Summit, and his brother remains here in Lee Summit, and he is also a performer, a pretty well-known local performer, Mike Metheny. So that's really a favorite item. We had a couple who came in here from Boston. A lot of people come into the museum and they have no idea who Pat Metheny is. Yeah. So it's not that much of an interest to them. But we had a couple who came in who obviously were jazz lovers, and they were just absolutely blown away that we had Pat Metheny's first
That's awesome.
first Grammy here. Yeah,
But
so really fascinating.
listeners, the Grammys are tiny. They like fit in your palm.
Yeah.
And they don't look as impressive as I imagined.
No, they don't. No, it's not quite the dramatic sculpture that a Oscar is, for example. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you have a least favorite item?
Least favorite item? Yeah, I guess I do. Probably the least favorite one is a Nazi flag. And
Wow.
you might say
that?
why? You might say why would we have a Nazi flag in our museum?
Oh no, it makes sense based on what else.
Well,
you said about
it was because in our exhibit on World War II, we have items that soldiers brought back from Europe,
like the flag.
right? And a flag was one of those items. Maybe another one that would vie for that was from World War I, and it was a kill belt.
I'm not sure I know what that is.
Kill belt is a belt that has metal items on it marking soldiers that documents individuals that were killed by that soldier.
Okay.
So it's kind of a trophy belt.
Yeah.
Kind of sad when you think what people are put into in war. Yeah.
Along the same vein, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned the KKK a lot.
Yeah.
Do you have any of those items here?
No, we don't have any of those items. We haven't found much documentation of it. We have, I think I shared with you that we had a meeting, a 90 plus year old man who wanted to donate items from his family, furniture, Victorian furniture. And we were sitting in chairs, in fact, that he donated to us. And we have a settee, but we didn't have room for all of the other Victorian furniture.
It's large.
It's large,
yes.
Very large, very tall, and we just don't have space in the museum. But he spent time in Lee Summit because one grandparent owned the lumber company and the grandparent owned the drugstore. And when he was a kid, he would spend time at the drugstore, and he was at the drugstore when the Ku Klux Klan marched through town, and he was scared and ran into the drugstore and hid under the shelving. And
Smart.
he said for a long time he had nightmares seeing the black shoes underneath the white robes peering out from under the shelving. It was the Klan was very active in this area and in most kind of more southern areas in the 20s and 30s in particular, and so it was definitely active here. This particular individual's family were not involved in the Klan. And not supportive of the Klan, and I'm sure that was part of this of his fear as a kid, as a kid as well. It would be good to get more documentation about that.
Oh, speaking of documentation,
yes.
So one of your best documents are all the newspapers. Tell us about that.
Oh yes, for a long time, the Lee Summit had a community newspaper, I think dating from 1900 up until the Star, Kansas City Star, bought them out. And I'm not sure what date that was, maybe 10 years ago or so.
So really recent.
Yeah, fairly recently. It might be a few more years from that. Initially, they retained the local office and a kind of skeleton staff here in Lee Summit, and then they consolidated. And so when they consolidated, they closed the office here, and they had retained physical paper copies of all the journals up until that time, and they didn't want them. They were either going to give them away or destroy them. And so we were contacted by the local staff member here to see if we wanted them. And we did.
And the answer to that is always yes.
Yes, the answer is always yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful research trove. Although one thing we did learn is that the coverage in local newspapers in some ways was very complete about the social life in the community and what was going on and who was visiting and who was going into the military and all this type of thing. But it was also it didn't cover national events at all.
Yeah,
so you
sense.
don't get that perspective. It would have been interesting to see what a local perspective on national events was.
That's true.
Yeah. But we use it for a lot of research. We dedicated a room in our basement as the journal room. It's named after a former publisher of the Lee Summit Journal, and we have a lot of artifacts from his career in that room, as well as all of the bound journals. We have a couple of our volunteers really like to do research. They're retired teachers, and they have researched a number of different topics that are the basis of some of our special exhibits that we do. I use them in researching the Lee Summit at War exhibit. And as I mentioned to you earlier, it was fascinating because it was just really interesting to see early photos of people that you know as much older people, as well as seeing ads that are very period ads from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. But it does make doing research a lot more time consuming because you get easily distracted.
Yeah. You have to be really disciplined. Or
you do.
Just build in some extra time.
That's right. Or just build it in. Yeah.
So, what is your next rotating exhibit going to be, and when?
Probably we do an exhibit every year for Black History Month in February. And so I suspect that our volunteers who do that have probably been researching that now. But that will probably be our next special exhibit. We do a different one. We try to do a different one. We had a small Black community in Lee Summit. It fluctuated over time, and the history of our Black community is not really well documented in recorded history. So we're trying to piece together as much of that as we can and to research different aspects of it. So I'm not sure what their focus is going to be this time, but given the time of year it is, I suspect that'll be the next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned one event that you have regularly, a bi-monthly lecture series.
Yes. Right.
Do you have other regular events?
We have. We do have. One of the things that we do is we regularly do a. Prior to the pandemic, we did a potluck dinner, which people really enjoyed for our membership and volunteers that people brought. That became problematic during the pandemic in terms of having a crowd of people, as well as people feeling kind of uncomfortable with, is this food safe?
Yeah.
And so we changed that now to more of a appreciation reception that we have for our members and volunteers in December. And we have refreshments and punch and things of that sort. It is, as was the dinner, a chance for people to get together and talk and socialize. And so that's a regular event that we do. We now, we had been doing a number of small fundraising events. We had to put those on hold during the pandemic, and we began to focus on, is there a way that we can have a project that will help raise funds for the museum, but will also contribute to what we do as a museum. And so we had a committee who came up with the idea of recognizing legends of Lee Summit. And a legend of Lee Summit is an individual or a family who has had a major impact on the community. We have 7 different categories of impact.
Okay. What are they?
Well, I probably am not going to remember all 7, but they range from things like civic/pioneer to education, to the arts, sports, business, various categories like that. Is that 5?
That's 4.
Is that 4? Okay, so that's pretty good. It's a majority anyway. And so each year we try to make sure that they're not all in one category, but have them separate. And so it really has 2 purposes. A major purpose is that we recognize that a lot of what we recognize in museums and what we document in museums is the old history, the formative history. What we're not as good about doing is showing the movement of history and recognizing people and events that have a major impact on our community as we go through time. So the goal of the Legends of Lee Summit is to recognize people in any era which may be not fully recognized in our museum currently. And so it can be someone from the 1800s or it can be someone from today. And we have we really have a mix of those. And we want to recognize that history is not just done by people who are now old. There are younger people who are shaping our history, and we want to recognize them as well. And so we have a gala that celebrates those people who are selected. We have a whole involved process in selecting them, and then they are announced on the steps of the museum. In February, we have a reception in their honor, just with them and some of the people from the museum. And then in May, we have a gala in which we obtain sponsorships for that event. We sell tickets to the event. People bring their friends and family, and then they're recognized. We recognize 2 families and 2 individuals last year, and we're just now in the process of selecting the recipients that will be recognized in May. We give them a special recognition at the museum, but that's for them to take home, and then we recognize them permanently at the museum. The way that we recognize them is a little bit unique in terms of what we're doing now. Because we're limited in space in the museum, we are going to be recognizing them outside the museum. We'll have panels that, the panels will be about 24 by 42 inches, and they will be etched.
Cast iron?
Not cast iron.
Steel?
Stainless steel. Thank you. Yeah, they'll be etched stainless steel with their portrait etched into it, as well as information about each of those individuals or families. The first panel will be to the right of the stairs leading to the entrance of the museum, and then over time the panels will wrap around the side of the museum. So our intention is that over time you'll be able to trace the progression of those all through. Our location is right in front of or across from the Amtrak station here in Lee Summit. So the other positive thing that does is that it gives some people something of interest at the museum because our museum, being totally staffed by volunteers, is only open 3 days a week.
Okay.
And so there still will be something of interest for people to see at the museum those other days of the week, and something that might help draw them to actually come into the museum then at some point as well.
I also like the idea of it being outside the building to show that history is not confined to museums.
Exactly. And in terms of long-term goals, that's one of the goals that we've had. We talked about wanting to do a downtown walking history tour.
Oh, that would be great.
That would be, you could use on your phone. You could, a person could use a QR number, for example, or if they prefer a paper copy, they can pick up a paper copy here. And then we have one of our board members who's really interested in developing a driving tour of the area that would allow people to drive out to points of historical interest right around the community. It would take them past Longview Farm, it would take them past Unity, it would take them past some of the locations where the border war folks would get together after raids on Kansas, for example. There actually still is a farm near Lake Lalawana that was one of the locations where where they would gather after a raid. We have columns from the house here, in fact. Yeah.
Well, that's all the questions I had prepared. Is there anything else you wanted to tell us?
I don't think so. We've covered quite a bit of territory.
We did.
Actually, yeah. One thing I would say is that when people come into the museum, we are organized in such a way that there are always docents available to give you a tour of the museum. If people prefer just to browse themselves, they can do that. But the docents themselves receive training. So they can provide some of the background information so that is always available. And that's not something that small local museums are always able to do.
That's true.
Yeah.
So give us the rest of the deets about the museum. You're open 3 days a week.
Yeah, open 3 days a week. They're Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And we have both, we have winter hours, which are more restricted. And then we have longer hours beginning in April, from April to January, I think we go through Christmas at least. And those regular hours go from 10 to 2 on Thursday and Friday, and 10 to 4 on Saturday.
Okay. So, and if somebody wants to look you up and learn more about it, you have a website,
yes,
Facebook?
We do. We have a website. The website is actually Lee Summit Museum. That's all together. .com.
Okay. And is that Lee Summit with a small s and a big S, or just a big S?
Yeah, it's all lowercase letters.
Okay.
All lowercase letters. Yeah.
But does it have 2 S's?
It has 2 S's.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
So it's Lee's Summit Museum. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. No apostrophe. No apostrophe.
I don't think I've ever seen a website with an apostrophe in it.
No, I don't think there is. In fact, I know a lot of times when you order something or when you enter information, and a lot of them will not accept an apostrophe. If you put an apostrophe in, they'll reject your entry. You have to re-enter it.
And if somebody was interested in volunteering, how would they do
if
that?
they were volunteering, the person to contact would
It's
be.
spelled it.
I'll get that. The person to contact would be Sue Hart, and you could leave a message for her at 816-287-4477.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for visiting. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Hey listeners, I just want to say thank you for listening to this episode and thank you for continuing to support me. And if you are not already doing so, please make sure you are following, liking, subscribing to all my social media pages. That's Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, Tumblr, and YouTube. Visit my website for additional information on all the topics. That's homegrownkc.wordpress.com. And don't forget, you can sign up for my newsletter there once a month. You'll get an email that says here's what's new and upcoming, what you can look forward to. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can email me at homegrownkcpodcast@gmail.com. You can DM me on any of my social media networks. And don't forget, you can also message me here on Patreon. If you want to check out what merchandise I have available, go to zazzle.com/store/homegrown_kc_store. Special thanks goes out to my talented sister-in-law, Sarah McCombs, for the creation of my logo, to the Dear Misses for the use of their song Kansas City as the intro and outro music of every episode, to local libraries which enable me to gather all my research, to the Lee Summit Historical Society and Museum, and to you. Bye.
Seem to shake this feeling, and I can't seem to get you off my mind.